Right now, somewhere in your banking app, there is a number quietly insulting you. And if you bank with one of the three biggest brick-and-mortar banks in America, that number is 1/100th of 1%. Let that sink in. 0.01%. Let me introduce you to two people. First, we have Yvette. Yvette has loyally parked $31,000 at the exact same megabank since she was 22 years old. Because of that 0.01% rate, her bank hands her a grand total of $3 a year. $3. Then we have her brother-in-law, Curtis. Curtis has almost the exact same amount of money. It carries the same federal insurance, the exact same zero-risk profile, but he earns about $1,350 a year. That is 450 times more than Yvette. Is Curtis a financial genius? Does he have an inside scoop on Wall Street? No. He filled out a web form while half watching a cooking show on a Tuesday night. It took him 15 minutes. If your money is sitting where Yvette's is sitting, you are on the wrong side of that math. Today, every finance channel on the internet is calling this the Great High-Yield Savings Comeback of 2026. But I'm here to tell you, it is not a comeback. It's something considerably stranger, and Curtis is going to show you exactly why, right after I tell you how he nearly lost every single penny of it. Before we dive into the deep end, a quick warning. Every rate I quote today moves, sometimes weekly, so check the live numbers before you act on anything. By the end of this video, I am going to give you a bulletproof checklist. But first, we need to talk about your gap, because you almost certainly have one, and I guarantee it's bigger than you think. The best high-yield savings accounts in America right now pay up to 4.5%. That's what you could be earning. But the FDIC, the folks who insure your money, they survey over 500 institutions to publish what Americans actually earn, and that number is a pitiful 0.38%. It hasn't moved since early spring. So the typical saver earns about 1/12th of what's available out there. And honestly, that average is generous, because online banks are dragging it upward. If your money sits at a big traditional brick-and-mortar bank, you are literally earning 1 penny per $100 per year. If you leave a $100 bill there for 12 months, you earn a penny. A gumball machine would reject it. And here is why this is worse than boring. Inflation. In June, inflation ran at 3.5%, with core inflation at 2.6%. Your money isn't sitting still. It is shrinking. Every single year you leave it in that megabank, it buys you less. Yvette's $31,000 loses roughly $1,000 of purchasing power annually, while her bank pats her on the back and hands her $3 for her loyalty. Meanwhile, Curtis is actually beating inflation by about a point. Same country, same week, same risk. Almost every video you watch gets this backwards. The narrative is that rates came back. They didn't. They actually fell. Back in the summer of 2023, top accounts were paying over 5%. Then the Federal Reserve started cutting rates. They cut them 6 times between September 2024 and the end of 2025. The target dropped from 5.25% down to 3.5%. And guess what? Your banks passed those cuts on to you immediately, enthusiastically, in full. They cut your rate faster than they ever raised it. So 4.5% today isn't a recovery. It's the tail end of a long, quiet decline. So why is everyone suddenly shouting about savings accounts in 2026? Because for the first time in 15 years, a boring savings account actually beats inflation without you doing anything clever. Let's talk about a dirty little industry secret called deposit beta. It measures how much of a Fed rate change your bank actually passes on to you. If the Fed hikes a full point and your bank raises your rate by half a point, that's a beta of 50%. Researchers have found that deposit beta is asymmetric. When the Fed cuts rates, your bank cuts your payout fast and fully. But when the Fed hikes rates, what reaches your account is slow, partial, and frequently indistinguishable from zero. In the banking world, they say deposit pricing is downwards flexible and upwards sticky. That is a very expensive, fancy way of saying the elevator only goes down, and somebody set the stairs on fire.
All right. So at this point, you're fired up. You're ready to move your money. You want that 4.5%. But this is exactly where Curtis messed up, and it almost cost him everything. When Curtis moved his money, he did what we all do. He Googled it, and he clicked on the biggest number. And guys, the biggest number is almost never the right one. Some advertised rates are purely promotional. They quietly reset after 3 or 6 months, long after you've forgotten to check. Others are tiered, meaning they advertise 10%, but read the fine print. It only applies to your first $1,000. Everything above that, earns pocket lint. But Curtis's real mistake was subtler. And it's the most important thing I need you to take away from this entire video. Several of the absolute best rates he found weren't offered by actual banks. They were offered by apps, fintech companies. They have clean interfaces, slick designs, and a tiny line of text at the bottom reading FDIC insured. Here is what that line actually means. FDIC insurance covers $250,000 per depositor per insured bank. But apps are not banks. They partner with banks. They use middleware to pool your money into shared accounts. The insurance is supposed to pass through to you, but that pass-through depends entirely on somebody, somewhere keeping an accurate ledger that your money is actually yours. In 2024, a middleware company called Synapse, which sat between dozens of these fintech apps and their partner banks, went bankrupt. Over 100,000 people were locked out of their own money. The ledgers had never been properly reconciled. At one app alone, customers who deposited $65 million were offered a combined total of under $12 million back. People had put in tens of thousands of dollars, only to be told the bank had $2 in their name. And technically, the money was sitting in FDIC-insured banks the whole time. Insurance protects you when a bank fails. It does absolutely nothing when the tech company standing between you and the bank loses track of you. Curtis moved $30,000 into one of these apps to chase an extra 15 basis points. On $30,000, 15 basis points is $45 a year. He managed to pull his money out before the collapse happened, but that was the trade he made. He risked $30,000 for an extra $45. When you compare accounts, your first question shouldn't be, what's the rate? It needs to be, whose name is on the bank charter? Once Curtis learned the hard way about bank charters, he learned the second thing, the thing nobody tells you about: taxes. Your savings interest is taxed as ordinary income, federal and state. If you make $1,000 in interest, Uncle Sam is taking a slice. But here's the loophole. Interest on U.S. Treasury bills is fully taxable at the federal level, but it is 100% exempt from state and local income taxes. So, that comparison you see on a rate shopping site where a savings account pays 4.5% and a one-year Treasury bill pays 4.15% is an illusion. If your state taxes income, the bigger number can actually lose.
Let's run the math for a top bracket earner in California. A 4.5% savings account nets about 2.2% after all taxes are paid. But that 4.15% Treasury bill, it nets about 2.8% because California can't touch it. That is roughly 27% more after-tax income for a nearly identical risk-free asset. Now, if you live in Texas or Florida, a state with no income tax, that advantage vanishes and the savings account wins on pure convenience. So the right answer actually depends on your zip code, which is incredibly annoying, but it's the truth. Yvette lives in Ohio and has a modest balance. She should stop stressing about Treasury bills and just open the standard high-yield savings account. Half of getting personal finance right is knowing which half of the advice you can completely ignore. Now, before you go build a doomsday bunker out of Treasury bills, let me argue against myself for a minute. Any video about savings accounts that skips this next part is just a disguised advertisement. Cash is a terrible place to build long-term wealth, period. Over the last century, there has not been a single 20-year stretch where U.S. stocks lost money. Not one. Over 20 years, $10,000 in stocks historically became something like $67,000. In cash, it became about $18,000. That gap is the difference between retiring comfortably and having a very long, uncomfortable conversation with your kids about moving into their spare bedroom. But 2026 is unique. Vanguard's 10-year forecast for U.S. stocks, published earlier this year, sits at around 3.9% to 5.9% annualized returns. Meanwhile, guaranteed cash pays around 4%. When a decade of expected stock returns barely clears what a zero-risk savings account pays today, holding a little more cash is more defensible now than it has been in 15 years. So, where does your cash actually belong? Your emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of living expenses. Sinking funds, money you need within 1 to 3 years. The new tires, the insurance deductible, the destination wedding you have to be in whether you want to or not.
Only about 46% of American adults can currently cover 3 months of expenses. That isn't just a statistic. That is the difference between a transmission failure being a bad weekend and a transmission failure being the domino that starts a mountain of credit card debt. A 4.5% yield doesn't make you rich. What it does is make your safety cushion grow while you sleep instead of shrinking while you sleep. Everything past that 3-year timeline, though, that belongs in the market. Don't put your retirement in a savings account just because the rate feels safe. You will have successfully protected yourself from the wrong danger. Which brings us back to Yvette, and the only math I actually need you to remember today. Yvette has $31,000. A year from now, at her current mega bank rate, she will have $31,003. In a competitive high-yield account, she'd have about $32,400. That's roughly $1,300 just for filling out a form on her phone. Stretch that out. $30,000 left at the national average for 10 years becomes $31,000. The same $30,000 at 4.5% becomes roughly $46,500. That is $15,000 of difference. Same money, same risk, conjured out of absolutely nothing but a Tuesday evening and some mild irritation with your current bank.
So here is your exact checklist. Take a screenshot of this. Curtis paid for this checklist the expensive way, so you don't have to. Confirm the rate is permanent, not promotional. Confirm it applies to your whole balance, not just the first $1,000. Confirm you are depositing with an actual chartered bank or credit union. Look for member FDIC. Make sure it's not a middleware app sitting on top of a bank. Stay under $250,000 per bank per ownership category. If you are in a high-tax state with a large cash balance, run the Treasury bill comparison first. That's it. That is your whole move. Now look, I am not a financial advisor, and this isn't financial advice. It is arithmetic, and you should always check my arithmetic. But here's what I keep coming back to. The high-yield savings comeback of 2026 isn't really about interest rates at all. Rates actually went down. The banks didn't suddenly get generous. The Fed didn't get kind. Nothing was handed back to you. The only thing that changed is that enough people finally woke up and looked. Yvette's money didn't underperform because she made a bad decision. It underperformed because she never made one at all. And the entire American banking system is built patiently and profitably. So here is your exact checklist. Take a screenshot of this. Curtis paid for this checklist the expensive way, so you don't have to. Confirm the rate is permanent, not promotional. Confirm it applies to your whole balance, not just the first $1,000. Confirm you are depositing with an actual chartered bank or credit union. Look for member FDIC. Make sure it's not a middleware app sitting on top of a bank. Stay under $250,000 per bank per ownership category. If you are in a high-tax state with a large cash balance, run the Treasury bill comparison first. That's it. That is your whole move. Now look, I am not a financial advisor, and this isn't financial advice. It is arithmetic, and you should always check my arithmetic. But here's what I keep coming back to. The high-yield savings comeback of 2026 isn't really about interest rates at all. Rates actually went down. The banks didn't suddenly get generous. The Fed didn't get kind. Nothing was handed back to you. The only thing that changed is that enough people finally woke up and looked. Yvette's money didn't underperform because she made a bad decision. It underperformed because she never made one at all. And the entire American banking system is built patiently and profitably on the assumption that you won't either. Curtis didn't beat her because he was smarter. He beat her because one evening he bothered to look. So go look, not at the stock market, not at your complex crypto portfolio. Open your standard banking app, find the exact interest rate on your savings account, and read it out loud. If that number embarrasses you, congratulations. You have just found the highest paying 15 minutes available to you this entire year. Get it done today. I'll see you in the next one.